can they see these things?
Stop that!
M-I-C...
All in the Family ran for 9 seasons on CBS and changed American television forever. 50 million people tuned in every week, but not everyone making the show was happy to be there. Today, we're looking at 5 actors who hated being on All in the Family. Number 5, Carroll O'Connor.
1, 2, 3.
If you watched All in the Family in the 70s, Carroll O'Connor was the show. He was Archie Bunker, that big, blustery guy in the chair, yelling at the television, calling his son-in-law a meathead. O'Connor inhabited that character so completely that it's hard to imagine anyone else in that seat. The show topped the Nielsen ratings for 5 consecutive years, and a huge part of why it worked was the sheer force of O'Connor's performance. He made Archie Bunker simultaneously infuriating and heartbreaking, a man full of flaws who could still, in quiet moments, surprise you with his humanity. But the truth is, Carroll O'Connor was miserable for a good portion of his time on that show, and the man making him miserable, at least in O'Connor's view, was producer Norman Lear. It started almost from the beginning. According to Lear's own memoir, Even This I Get to Experience, O'Connor would sit down to every table read Worried and Unhappy. Lear described the pattern plainly. Most of the time, they'd hear the same thing from O'Connor. It just doesn't work. The scripts, the scenes, the direction. Something was always wrong. Lear eventually concluded that a lot of it came from fear, the kind of deep, gnawing anxiety that can come from carrying the weight of the country's biggest television show on your shoulders every single week. And O'Connor carried all of it. But it went beyond just nerves. O'Connor felt Lear consistently doubted his sincerity and worked against him. With the cast, with the press, with the public. O'Connor once told reporters that Lear seemed determined to make him unpopular, with viewers, with the profession, and with the people he worked alongside every day. That's a heavy thing to say about the man producing your show, and it tells you something about how personal and bruising the dynamic between them had become. The two clashed repeatedly over creative control. O'Connor was a writer himself. He largely rewrote the original pilot script and contributed significantly to how Archie Bunker spoke and thought. Many of Archie's most memorable malapropisms, the ones that made the character feel so real and specific, came directly from O'Connor's own instincts. He felt Lear's vision of comedy didn't always match his own, and he wasn't shy about saying so. A biography by author Trip Wetzel described their relationship as very difficult and contemptuous, while also noting that deep down, beneath all the friction, there was real mutual respect. It just rarely made it to the surface in any clean or easy way. His principles had already shown themselves clearly during the CBS technicians' strike of 1972, when the network's workers walked out over an attempt to replace them with automated equipment. O'Connor, a lifelong union man, flatly refused to cross the picket line. He told reporters, "I've been a trade union man all my life. I cannot work with strikebreakers." The show was in its 3rd season and at the top of the ratings, and none of that mattered to him. He stayed home until the strike was settled. Then, in 1974, the tension with Lear and the network boiled over in a different way. O'Connor walked off the show during season 5 and stayed away for nearly 3 weeks. This time it was a contract dispute. He sued the production company and demanded 12 weeks of vacation out of a 24-week contract along with better working conditions overall. The press immediately framed it as a salary fight, and O'Connor pushed back on that characterization, insisting the issues ran deeper. CBS threatened to cancel the show entirely if they didn't get a new episode on schedule. O'Connor eventually returned, and they managed to tape an episode that knocked the studio audience flat. It reportedly had people in tears, and the cast agreed it was some of their best work to date. What makes O'Connor's story so fascinating is the contradiction at the center of it. For all his bitterness about how the show was run, for all his battles with Lear and with the scripts, he never stopped caring deeply about Archie Bunker. He took the character seriously. More seriously, he sometimes implied, than anyone else involved. He understood Archie not as a buffoon to be laughed at, but as a genuinely tragic figure, a man poisoned by fear and bigotry from an early age, unable to adapt to a world that kept changing around him. That conviction gave the performance its depth. O'Connor once appeared on the Dick Cavett Show specifically to push back against the idea that Archie was simply lovable. He wanted people to understand what they were really watching. After O'Connor died of a heart attack in June 2001, Norman Lear shared a detail that stayed with a lot of people. On O'Connor's desk, otherwise completely clean and bare, was a single letter. Lear had written it 4 years earlier, telling O'Connor how much his performance had meant to him and apologizing for the stress their conflicts had caused over the years. O'Connor had kept it there, alone on that desk, for years. Lear said it was the only thing on the desk, and that it had apparently been that way for some time. For all the bitterness, for all the battles, that letter was apparently the thing he kept close. It says a great deal about what both men meant to each other underneath all of it, and about how much can go unsaid between two people who, despite everything, were deeply connected to the same work. Number 4. Jean Stapleton.
I ain't done nothing with my hair. I just wash it and dry it and roll it.
Jean Stapleton won 3 Emmy Awards playing Edith Bunker. She gave one of the warmest, most quietly complex performances in television history, turning a character who could have easily been a one-note doormat into someone genuinely good, genuinely human. Edith was patient, kind, occasionally oblivious, but she was also, over the course of 9 seasons, one of the most morally consistent characters on the show. When the episodes got serious, and some of them got very serious, it was often Edith's quiet decency that anchored everything. The audience loved her. Norman Lear loved her. Almost everyone who ever watched the show loved her. But Jean Stapleton was ready to be done with Edith Bunker long before the show was ready to let her go. By the late 1970s, Stapleton had been playing that character for nearly a decade, and she was starting to feel something she had feared from the very beginning, that Edith was swallowing her whole. She was a trained stage actress with an impressive Broadway resume. She had performed in Funny Girl, Damn Yankees, Bells Are Ringing. She was a singer. She was a serious performer with real range. And she was quietly watching all of that range disappear as Edith Bunker became, in the public's mind, completely inseparable from Jean Stapleton herself. People had stopped seeing the actress. They only saw the character. She spoke about it in interviews with a kind of careful honesty. She said plainly that she just didn't want to play Edith all her life. She had given everything she had to that role for 9 years, and she wanted something different. She wanted to put distance between herself and the image, not because she was ungrateful for it, but because she knew what she was capable of, and she wanted the chance to prove it in other ways. After leaving, she played Eleanor Roosevelt in a critically praised television film, returned to Broadway, and continued working steadily in theater and television for the rest of her life. In December 1978, she announced she would not renew her contract when season 9 finished. The headlines that followed genuinely hurt her. Several newspapers ran variations of "Edith quits," which made it sound like she had stormed off in anger, or that something had gone badly wrong behind the scenes. Stapleton was hurt by that framing. "Quit makes it sound as if I was leaving in anger or with something unfinished," she told reporters. "It just isn't so. I love Edith. She changed my life." That was not an empty thing to say. Her time on the show was something she spoke of with genuine warmth all her life. She called it the highest education in comedy she ever received. She was proud of the show's social conscience. She credited the experience with sharpening her mind and deepening her craft. She simply wanted to exist outside of Edith as well. Norman Lear had actually wanted to end the show at its peak. He felt All in the Family had done what it needed to do, and wrapping it up while it was still critically beloved was the right call. But CBS wasn't ready to walk away from one of the most watched programs on television. The network's vice president, Robert Daly, convinced Carroll O'Connor to keep going, and the compromise was that the show would continue under the new title, Archie Bunker's Place. Stapleton agreed to appear in 5 episodes of the new series to help with the transition, and then Edith was written out. She had died of a stroke, off-screen, between seasons. That decision was apparently painful for Lear even to discuss. He had invested so much of himself in that character, drawing on his own mother to shape who Edith was. He later said, "To me, she isn't only fiction." He and Stapleton even established the Edith Bunker Memorial Fund in her honor, supporting women's issues and the Equal Rights Amendment, a tribute to how much the character had come to mean beyond the screen. For Jean Stapleton, the decision to leave was ultimately liberating. She had done the work, she had earned the legacy, and she walked away from it on her own terms. Number 3. Rob Reiner.
Let me get out the door!
Rob Reiner came to All in the Family as a young actor with a famous last name and a lot to prove. His father was Carl Reiner, the man behind The Dick Van Dyke Show, one of the most beloved sitcoms of the 1960s. Growing up in that household, Rob had been around comedy royalty his whole life. Mel Brooks, Woody Allen, Neil Simon, they were regulars at his father's house. Norman Lear himself was someone Rob had known since childhood, when their families vacationed together on Fire Island. So when Lear cast him as Michael Stivich, Archie Bunker's liberal, college-educated, perpetually hungry son-in-law, it felt in some ways like a natural continuation of a long relationship. Reiner threw himself into the role completely. The dynamic between Michael and Archie was one of the engines that drove the whole show. Every week, the two of them would go at it, over race, over politics, over religion, over what order you put on your socks and shoes. Michael was everything Archie wasn't. Young, educated, idealistic, open-minded, and Archie called him a meathead, dead from the neck up. The insult became one of the most recognizable nicknames in television history, and it followed Rob Reiner for the rest of his life. By season 2, though, Rob Reiner had already had enough. In 1972, speaking to the Chicago Tribune, Reiner was blunt about where he stood. The show was now the #1 program in America, and he felt creatively suffocated. He said he was tired of doing the same character over and over. Playing Michael Stivich week after week barely scratched the surface of what he could actually do. The grind of producing more than 20 episodes a year was relentless, and it left almost no room to breathe, let alone pursue anything else. He said directly that he thought they had already done enough shows, that the idea of continuing indefinitely was exhausting just to think about. The following year, he added another layer to his frustration. He told a reporter that he felt exploited. The show was generating enormous amounts of money through merchandise, clothing, mugs, novelties, all the commercial tie-ins that come with a pop culture phenomenon. None of it was coming to him in any meaningful way. The residuals deal he had signed was poor, and watching the show become a commercial empire while his own share of it stayed small wore on him. He was careful to say that money itself wasn't really the point. What he cared about was fairness, and underneath all of it was something even bigger. He didn't just want to act, he wanted to write. He wanted to direct. He wanted to make films. He could feel all of those things pulling at him every week he spent on a sitcom set playing a character he had already figured out years earlier. All in the Family was consuming his calendar and leaving no space for the work he actually wanted to be doing. And yet, despite saying all of this out loud as early as 1972, Reiner stayed. He stayed through season 8, appearing in 174 of the show's 202 episodes. That's an extraordinary number for someone who announced his frustration before the show even reached its peak. Part of what kept him, he later said, was his genuine love for Norman Lear, the man he described as a second father. Their families had history. Their bond was real. Walking away from that wasn't simple, even when walking away from the job felt completely logical. When he finally left in 1978, the door to his directing career opened almost immediately. This Is Spinal Tap arrived in 1984 and became a cult classic. Stand By Me followed in 1986. Then, The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, Misery, A Few Good Men, one after another, film after film, Reiner built one of the most impressive directorial runs of the 1980s and early 1990s. Each new movie put more distance between Rob Reiner, the filmmaker, and Michael Stivich, the meathead. He worked with some of the best writers in Hollywood, William Goldman, Nora Ephron, Aaron Sorkin, and delivered films that people still quote today. None of that was possible while he was locked into a weekly sitcom schedule, except not really, because the nickname never went away. Decades after leaving the show, Reiner would laugh about it in interviews. He said he could win the Nobel Prize, and the headline would still read, "Meathead wins Nobel Prize." He had made peace with it completely, and wore it as a badge of honor. But the career that followed, the one that made that joke funny rather than painful, only happened because he eventually got out. Number 2. Sally Struthers.
Daddy, don't. Daddy.
I'm turning
Daddy,
on to the
don't.
right there.
As good citizens, we all have to cooperate.
Sally Struthers won 2 Emmy Awards for playing Gloria Bunker Stivich, Archie's only daughter, the sweet-natured, big-hearted young woman caught between her stubborn father and her idealistic husband. She was funny, she was warm, and on screen she seemed like the happiest person in the cast. She smiled through it all. She was the peacemaker, the mediator, the one who kept the household from completely falling apart. Behind the scenes, she spent $40,000 in legal fees trying to leave the show. The frustration built slowly, over years. From the very beginning, beginning, Struthers could see the imbalance clearly. Gloria was the fourth banana, the character with the least to do, the fewest lines, the smallest emotional real estate, while Carroll O'Connor was being given complex, layered storylines that let Archie confront his own contradictions, while Jean Stapleton was turning Edith into a genuinely moving portrait of a certain kind of American woman, while Rob Reiner got to argue philosophy and politics at the dinner table every week. Gloria mostly reacted. She stood in the background. She mediated. She tried to smooth things over. In a January 2025 podcast interview, Struthers finally described what her typical week on set actually looked like. She said she usually had about 3 lines per episode. "I'll help you set the table, Ma." "Michael, where are you going?" "Oh, Daddy, stop it." And then the next week, she said, she'd get the same 3 lines in a different order. If the writers genuinely couldn't figure out what to do with her in a particular scene, the solution was simple. They'd just send her upstairs to take a bath or wash her hair, week after week, season after season. It was, she said, deeply frustrating for someone who had real comedic ability and wanted desperately to use it. By 1974, after 3 full seasons of this, she decided she was done. She hired lawyers and took the matter to arbitration, seeking to get out of her contract. She lost. The case went against her, and she had no choice but to return to the show. But something shifted after that fight. Whether the lawsuit itself sent a message, or whether the producers simply recognized they were underusing her, the character of Gloria began to develop in more interesting ways. Mike and Gloria had a baby. They eventually moved next door into the house the Jeffersons had left behind. Later, they moved to California altogether. Struthers later said those final seasons, the ones she had fought to escape, ended up being the most enjoyable of her entire run. The character finally felt like a real person, but beyond the creative frustrations, there was a more personal dimension to her unhappiness, and it centered on Norman Lear. In that same 2025 interview, Struthers spoke about him with a candor she had held back for years, saying she had deliberately waited until after his death in December 2023 to say what she really felt. She said that over 8 years on the show, she was never once invited to his home, not once, while other members of the cast were regular guests. That exclusion was something she carried quietly for a long time. She also said that Lear had told her, early in the show's run, exactly why she had been chosen to play Gloria. His reasoning, as she described it, was blunt and unkind. She had been hired because, like Carroll O'Connor, she had blue eyes and a fat face. She said hearing that didn't feel good at the time, and it still didn't feel good decades later. She also used the interview to share something else that had weighed on her for years. She said the original idea for All in the Family had not come from Norman Lear at all, but from Carroll O'Connor. According to Struthers, O'Connor had seen the British series Till Death Us Do Part during a visit to England, recognized immediately that it could work for an American audience, and wanted to produce an American version himself. When he couldn't get the backing he needed as an actor without a producing track record, he brought the idea to Lear. Lear took it and ran with it, without ever crediting O'Connor for the concept. Struthers said she had kept that to herself for years, not wanting to say it while Lear was still alive. Through all of it, Struthers remained clear about one thing. She loved the show. She loved playing Gloria. The role made her famous. It earned her 2 Emmys. It gave her a career and opened doors that wouldn't have opened otherwise. She has never pretended otherwise. She simply felt that she deserved to be treated with the same respect that was extended to her co-stars, and for most of her time on that set, she wasn't. Number 1. Vincent Gardenia.
I scream for you. Hello, everybody, back in.
Vincent Gardenia was one of the finest character actors of his generation, and that is not an overstatement. He had trained for decades in the theater, performing in Italian-language melodramas with his father's acting troupe as a child in Brooklyn, eventually making his way to Broadway and earning a Tony Award for Best Featured Actor in a play in 1972 for The Prisoner of Second Avenue, opposite Peter Falk. He was twice nominated for the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, first for the baseball drama Bang the Drum Slowly in 1973, and then again 13 years later for Moonstruck in 1987. He was a serious, gifted, deeply experienced performer with an extraordinary range. When All in the Family brought him in as Frank Lorenzo, Archie Bunker's new Italian-American neighbor. In season 4, it seemed on paper like it could be a great fit. Frank was warm, funny, a man who loved to cook and sing and drove Archie absolutely crazy with his easy liberalism and his obvious affection for his wife Irene, played by Betty Garrett. The character had real potential, and Gardenia, with his expressive face and natural warmth, was genuinely well suited to play him. He appeared in 10 episodes across season 4. By the end of that season, he was gone, and the show never gave the audience any real explanation of where Frank had disappeared to. The reason came out later, through Betty Garrett herself. She spoke about those days on set with remarkable honesty, describing what Gardenia was like between scenes. The picture she painted was of a man going quietly out of his mind. While Garrett would pass the downtime doing crossword puzzles with Sally Struthers, Gardenia would sit in a chair with a cigar, barely speaking, visibly unhappy. Vince would sit, smoking a cigar. He hated it, she said. He's a darling man, talented, funny, but I think he wanted out. And so Norman Lear, recognizing that keeping a deeply unhappy actor on a set serves nobody, eventually told him it was fine to go. The problem Gardenia had was structural, and it was the same problem that made Sally Struthers miserable, just more acute. All in the Family was, at its core, a show built around two people, Archie and Edith. Every storyline, every scene, every episode ultimately orbited those two performances. The supporting characters existed to feed material into that central relationship. For a recurring neighbor like Frank Lorenzo, that meant long stretches of waiting around for a few lines, without any real arc, without any real development, without any of the things that make playing a character feel worthwhile over time. For someone of Gardenia's caliber, that was genuinely difficult to tolerate. He had spent his entire career building full, complex human beings on stage and screen. He knew what it felt like to command a scene, to carry a performance, to dig into a character and bring something surprising out of it. Frank Lorenzo didn't offer any of that. The role was pleasant enough as written, but it was thin. And thin, for a man of his ambitions and his background, was a kind of slow frustration week after week. After Gardenia was released from the show, Garrett said the writers would occasionally have Edith ask where Frank had gone, and Irene would give some vague answer about him being on the road selling something. The show never resolved the character's disappearance in any real way. It was one of those loose threads that just quietly unraveled. For Gardenia, leaving was absolutely the right move. The film Death Wish came immediately after. His stage career continued to thrive. And then in 1987, 13 years after first appearing on All in the Family as Frank Lorenzo, he received his second Academy Award nomination for playing Cher's father in Moonstruck, a full, vivid, emotionally rich performance that let him do everything Frank Lorenzo never could. He played a man torn between love and loyalty, comic and heartbreaking at the same time, in a film that asked everything of him. It was the kind of work he had always been capable of. He just needed a role that was large enough to hold him. And All in the Family, for all its greatness, simply wasn't that role. All in the Family is one of the most important programs ever put on American television. It changed what the medium was willing to say and how it was willing to say it. The performances were extraordinary. The writing was sharp and honest in ways that primetime simply wasn't used to. And the impact it had on the shows that followed, on everything from The Jeffersons to Seinfeld to the way television handles social issues today, is impossible to overstate. It earned its place in the history books, and it deserved every bit of the praise it received. But it also reminds us that behind every great show is a whole world of tension, frustration, and compromise that never makes it onto the screen. The actors who gave so much to that program, some of them for nearly a decade, weren't always given that same energy in return. Some wanted out badly enough to spend their own money trying to leave. Some walked off entirely, and some sat in their chairs between scenes, smoking a cigar, just counting down the days. The show was great. The experience of making it, for several of the people who made it, was something else entirely. And now, decades later, knowing what went on behind those cameras makes watching it feel just a little bit different, and maybe even richer for it. If you enjoyed this one, hit that like button and subscribe. It really does help, and there's a lot more television history coming your way.